Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of this new project that I'm doing called Life Lessons and Combat Sports. And I think the best thing to do very briefly is just to introduce myself and give a little bit of a background as far as why I'm doing this project. So, my name is Eric Hamidi, and I have been a combat sports fan for many years now, ever since I was a child. And also, as a little bit of a disclaimer, you may see me look down for a second. That's just me checking the levels of my recorder right here. So now that that's out of the way, I've been a combat sports fan for 25 years at this point. It started when I was 7 and I started watching wrestling, and then eventually I started watching mixed martial arts at age 14, and then I started watching boxing at 23. And I guess my main motivation for doing this whole thing is just to combine some different passions, combine some different wants or desires that I just either want to do or want to achieve or that I like to do. So, in the time that I've spent watching all the different combat sports that I've been watching, I've seen a lot of things and I've heard of a lot of stories. And to be perfectly honest, it's kind of getting to a point in my life where I'm drawing a lot of meaning from it. And what I mean by that is that there are certain things that these wrestlers or fighters or individuals who are in the business, there are things that they go through that I feel like teaches us important lessons about life and can be used as, I guess, everyday wisdom for one's everyday life. There's something that someone goes through within the industry or their career that I feel like one can take away from it. And to be perfectly honest, unless you're in the know about these guys' careers and ladies, unless you're in the know about their careers and what they've been through, I'm not really sure how widespread that is. I'm not really sure how common knowledge that is. Now, that's not to say that this is the only line of work where you can sort of draw those conclusions. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people in a lot of different fields of work and life where you can, I guess, take inspiration or draw some sort of life lesson from them. It's just, for me personally, I'm just doing it in a way that I know how to, or a way that I can understand, or just through something that I enjoy. And not only am I trying to combine my love for combat sports, but I like to help people in ways that I can. And I guess a big motivation for that has been, lately, I've learned how much life can really beat us down and be really difficult. So, being around positive individuals or being around positive influences and positive environments can really make a world of difference. And I guess as I've kind of been thinking about this a little bit more, I guess part of this project is to maybe, if someone is listening to this who kind of went through the same struggles that I do, because somewhere down the line, I am going to talk about like struggles that I had with my fandom. And I don't know if maybe someone who listens to this might have those similar issues, but if they do, maybe they can get through it easier than I did, or what have you. I'm not really sure. This is something that I'm trying, and I want to see where it goes. And honestly, these things that I'll talk about in these episodes, it's things that I would personally like to one day ask. I mean, how do I put this? Because I'm viewing from a distance and, I don't know these people, I have to draw my own inferences. So I'm gonna give you my takeaways from some of these individuals' experiences, and these are just my opinions, and maybe other people will draw different conclusions, but this is just what I get from it. And maybe one day I'll get a chance to ask these people these questions, but until that happens, I can only do what I can, which is this. And I think I think that's a good enough of a I think that's good enough of an intro. So now I can kind of get into the subject matter at hand. And one more thing that I want to include is that, I mean, who am I to give anyone who's watching this life advice or to tell them what they should do, or without knowing the specifics of their life, how can I say that, oh, you should do X, Y, and Z? But all I'm doing is just trying to provide information, and it's kind of like whoever watches this can do what they want with that info. This is just a way of me trying to, I guess, utilize my fandom for combat sports and make something of use out of it, or just make it kind of beneficial to someone in some way. Because I sort of have been thinking that maybe the combat sports aspect of it will draw you in, and then you're interested to hear the life lessons part. Or if you're not into wrestling, excuse me, if you're not into wrestling or MMA or any type of combat sport, then the life lesson attribute can draw you in, and then you may find some of this stuff informative. And this is a way for me to draw different audiences together. So with that out of the way, let's just get into it. So the particular individual that I'm talking about today is Stone Cold Steve Austin. And he was a wrestler during the 90s he was basically the poster boy of the 90s boom period for wrestling. I mean, I would argue that he's on par with the type of fame and popularity that not Stone Cold, sorry. He's on the same level that a Rock is, or John Cena, or Hulk Hogan. And that the only other time period that rivals the popularity of wrestling in the 90s was in the 80s. And it was just to a level where everybody was watching it, and there were so many fans. Everyone that I knew was watching it, and just it drew millions of people on it drew millions of viewers on TV every week. And it's almost as if Austin was at the top of that list in such a popular period with so many stars, not just in WWE, which was WWF at the time, but also WCW as well. And I think his run that he had from 97 to the early 2000s demonstrates something very important, that I think it just sort of teaches us that before I get into that, I should probably say that a lot of people sort of view Stone Cold, his personality, his style, the way he wrestled, as like a brawler type. But what people don't know, or maybe somebody watching this doesn't know, is that prior to 1997, he had more of a technical style. And that he had those attributes. But then that all changed in 1997 when he had a match with Owen Hart at that year's SummerSlam. And they did a spot where Owen did a tombstone pile driver on Austin, just driving his head on the mat. And he wasn't able to protect his head, so Owen drove Austin's mat on the head. It collided with the mat, so his head landed directly, it just spiking on the mat, and it caused a lot of damage for him. And not only was it a big hindrance during his career, but it also altered everything after that. Like I said, he had to change his style to more of a brawler type. But more importantly, that injury ended up shortening his career. And I guess I point that out because when you think about some other wrestlers like a John Cena or Triple H or Hulk Hogan or what have you, it's that they had quite a long time that they were wrestling. They wrestled for quite a long time. Where for Steve Austin's case, he had a relatively short career. The vast majority of his career was from the late 80s, early 90s until 2003. And in particular, when he started rising up and becoming such a big star in the late 90s, it's like he only had a period of a few years where he was the top guy and able to reap all the benefits from his stardom. And that's sort of in contrast to, like I said, with a John Cena, where he had that for 5-6 years or something. And I guess this is the lesson. Like, basically, it just caused him to have to retire early. And I think that's generally known throughout people in the industry and all that stuff, that's what shortened his career. And the lesson that I take away from it, that I sort of, one interpretation I have of it is to appreciate the time that you have, to appreciate the time you have while you have it. And if I ever get an opportunity where I get to actually speak to Steve Austin, this is something that I would ask him, is that when he got injured, did that create a little bit of uncertainty with him in the sense that, okay, I only have so much time because of this injury, and I don't know how much time I'm going to have to continue my career, so I'm going to make the most of it. And or I guess another way to put it would be, because of that injury, did he think that I may not have a lot of time left and I'm just going to be grateful for whatever time that I do have? And to kind of expand on that, I kind of feel like that teaches us to enjoy what we can and make the most of the time that we have. And I would argue that that's exactly what he did. I mean, that 3 or 4 year time period where Steve Austin was the top guy, I mean, you could argue that he did more with his career in a few years, or accomplished more in his career in a few years than some people do in a 10, 20 year career. And I say that because he's one of those guys that even if you're not a wrestling fan, you have heard the name, or it sounds familiar, or you know who that person is. And I don't know, to me, I feel like that's kind of an important thing to take away. And honestly, that's applicable to many different facets of life. Professional, personal, no matter what it is that you're doing, we can draw that conclusion and we can take that into our lives. And, I guess that's something that I'm not perfect at myself, as far as being grateful for whatever time that I do have. It's something that I can work on appreciating, or just working on, like, having as an attribute myself. And I don't know, I guess lately I've been thinking about grandparents a lot. And I guess for me, that whole lesson of appreciating whatever time you do have, that's kind of relatable to my own personal life, where, for instance, there'll be times where I'll spend an hour with my grandparents, or I'll talk to them on the phone for 20 minutes or half an hour or so. And I don't know, for me, sometimes I think that that's not really a significant amount of time. And I don't know, sometimes I'll think, how is it that they can be, I guess, happy with such a short amount of time that I spent with them? And I don't know, sometimes I do think that I don't spend enough time with them. But then a lot of times what I'll hear is that even if it was just a 20-minute conversation, or I just had lunch with them, or it's been a long time since I talked to them or seen them, which that is the case with some of my grandparents, that are, no longer around. What I find out is that they really appreciated it. Despite how short of a time it was, or how long it may have been since I last saw them, they really are grateful for that. They're happy about that. And I think this whole situation with Steve Austin, or with my grandparents, or whatever it is that you may be going through in your life, I think a lot of it deals with gratitude. I think that's another important attribute, or another important takeaway from all this. I guess they kind of go hand in hand. And I guess at its core, you never really know how much time you have with someone or doing something. So if you, whatever time you get with it, just learn to appreciate it, learn to value it, learn to be happy with it, and make the most of that as you can. And I guess also lately I've kind of been thinking about this, that the perspective of my elders, and perhaps someone who's watching this, the perspective that they get from their elders is just learning to appreciate whatever you can, or the little things. And when I say perspective, I mean in the sense that they can appreciate what little time, or however much time that they get to spend with someone or see somebody. So maybe I can, or I should do that as well. And that whole idea of perspective, in another way, is that I know someone who, one time he was talking about how he had all these friends of his who would be all like, oh, I'm so old, and I feel old, and these are people in their 30s or what have you. And what he was describing was the fact that with his grandparents, they're actually old. So it's kind of along the lines of, how can I say that I'm old when I actually have relatives who are old, who are in their 70s or 80s or what have you? Now, what's the point of this? Is that is an example of trying to have perspective on something. And how this relates with the whole thing here is that if I see my grandparents who are actually old, how can I consider myself old? If my grandparents are able to enjoy and be thankful for whatever time they do have, or that they do spend with somebody, why can't I do that? If they can make the most of something, why can't I do that? And like I said earlier, the disclaimer, I'm not perfect at it, but I guess it's all about just getting whatever victories or whatever little victories that you can. And, maybe like that whole perspective, like, I don't know, it's kind of weird. It's kind of weird because I just sort of thought of this right now because it's like, whether it's my grandparents or Steve Austin, who was in his 30s when he was the top star, it might just be one of those things as you get older, you kind of gain that quality and you learn to live your life that way. And I don't know, maybe one day I'll get there too. Maybe when I'm the same age as my grandparents, maybe I'll kind of have the perspective that they do, where they just appreciate whatever time that they do have, or that like appreciate whatever time they do get to spend with loved ones or doing something that they enjoy. And it kind of, I don't know, that kind of hits heavy a little bit. To be honest, this whole endeavor kind of hits a little heavy because I've I want to relate this in a way that people can understand. And I guess I'd like to add my own personal touch to it, so that's why I'm sharing some of these stories with you, and that's why I'm saying some of this stuff. And it's like, maybe by having that kind of an attitude of making the most of something that you have is the reason why Stone Cold Steve Austin was able to accomplish as much as he did. And this whole idea of appreciating the time that you do have while you have it, I mean, maybe that's what helped him. Maybe that's what helped him become such a big star and make such an impact and make as much money as he did, or just headline all the pay-per-views that he did. And then also, what I think personally, just as importantly, because he made such an impact during his wrestling career, he was able to capitalize on that name value to have a successful career and have endeavors outside of wrestling, like after he was done wrestling. So then that way he wasn't in his 50s or 60s and he's still wrestling. So that's kind of, I don't know, maybe when you have that mentality, it can lead to a lot of success. I mean, it's not always going to be guaranteed, but that is something to kind of keep in mind of. And I guess as I try to wrap up this video, doing something like this is something that I've toyed around with in the past, because sometimes I'll do these videos for my own personal use. And lately I've been toying around with the idea of, let me do some type of public, like, let me do something like that, but for that, something that can be released for the public. And that's why, for me, I'm combining my love of combat sports to, I guess, these kinds of words of wisdom that I'm trying to give, for lack of a better term. I don't know. Maybe this is something that I'm meant to do. Maybe this is what my purpose is supposed to be. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to get too I don't want to get too philosophical or, be too grand about this, but like, I don't know if maybe this is something that I can utilize and what my usefulness to others can be. And a big motivation for why I'm doing this also is because I don't really think there's a lot of content like this. I don't think there's a lot of podcasts or videos or whatever it is kind of doing the things that I'm trying to do right now. So I feel like that kind of makes it unique. And on a personal note, I guess a big reason why I'm doing all of this is because it is sort of like my way of understanding or coping with the things that are going on in my life or that do happen in my life. And I guess that's another life lesson, kind of like doing what makes you happy. That'll be a future episode. But I think with Stone Cold Steve Austin, his career and what he did really shows us to appreciate that and appreciate the time, and to also make the most of it that we do have. And this whole aspect of time, that's even something that's described in the A&E biography on Stone Cold Steve Austin, is that at one point in the documentary, Paul Heyman, he says something along the lines of, I don't remember the exact verbiage, but he was saying that it's interesting, or it's just really amazing how big he became, but then also how quickly that all ended. And despite that short amount of time, as I said earlier, he did more in a few years than some people do their entire careers. So maybe that's something that I can and that you can take into your life as well. But I don't know, maybe I'm thinking too much about all this, to be perfectly honest, but it's like, these are the kinds of things that you kind of think about when you've been watching as long as I have. So I guess this is something like, this way of thinking or this way of perspective, this is something that I want to share among people. And I just hope that this was of use to you in some way, or you can draw some type of takeaway from that. And, like I said, this is only my interpretation of that particular incident with Steve Austin. It'd be great if I can actually get confirmation and, talk with him about that. But, time will tell. And I guess the one thing that I'll leave with you is that another reason why I'm doing this is because I'm basically taking a leap of faith right here, and it's funny because researching this episode, I came across this interview that Steve Austin did with this individual named Chris Van Vliet, and he asked him, like, what's a big lesson you've learned in your career or life advice that you would give to people? And he basically said, if you're on the fence about something, just go ahead and do that. And that's kind of the same philosophy that I'm taking here, or what I'm doing with this whole endeavor. And I'm very interested to see how this whole thing turns out. And just reviewing my notes real quick just to make sure that I hit everything that I wanted to. Let's see. Background, join time. Okay, giveaway, okay, yeah. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I hit everything. So, yeah, this is just the first of many, and hopefully there'll be many more to come. But thank you guys for taking the time to watch this, and let me know what you guys think in the comments section. So, I'm Eric Hamidi, and I'll see you on the next one.